Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on ISO 14001, 14064, and 50001. We will hear from our speaker, how can we maximize the environmental sustainability for your organizations and your teams. Our speaker for the day is Amir Shakir. He is a senior auditor based in UAE with LRQA, and I will introduce with him in just a moment. Amir, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Just the second slide, please. Before we begin, there are couple of things that I wanted to highlight. First, we get a lot of questions on whether we will receive the webinar recording. So yes, the webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing the recording within a week of the webinar's conclusion. Whatever questions you have during the speaker's presentation, please keep sending to us on chat. Do not wait till the end. You can start sending us the questions on chat. And once the speaker has presented, then we will start the question answer round where we will take your questions. Third, there will be a very short survey right after the webinar. Please fill in so that we know of more topics that you would like to hear us from. And lastly, and the most interesting bit for most of our webinar attendees, that all of you will be receiving a participation certificate after the webinar concludes. Can we move to the next slide, please, Amir? Yeah. So I'm Pallavi Banerjee. I handle the marketing for the APAC region within LRQA, and our speaker for today, as I said, is our senior auditor for EnMS and lead verifier, who is based in UAE, Dubai, with LRQA. Amir, thank you so much for joining us today. Just a quick introduction. Amir holds a climate change professional certification, and he's also an IRCA registered principal auditor for EMS, QMS, OSHAs, and other schemes. He's an expert in GHG verification and IMS certification. Throughout his career, Amir has conducted various audits for GHG, ESG strategies. He also has multinational experience and with global companies across countries like USA, Russia, Canada, Turkey, UAE, and Central Asia. So again, thank you so much, Amir, for joining us today, and over to you now. The session is all yours.
Thank you, Pallavi. Very good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. So we begin our session with a brief overview of corporate sustainability, and then we'll proceed to discuss in detail the environmental concept of ESG. And after that, we will see the correlation between the standards ISO 14001, ISO 14064, ISO 50001 vis-a-vis the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And along the way, we would be discussing the benefits of ISO certification and GHG verifications. Towards the end, we will have a session for question answers. So feel free to forward your questions on chat, and towards the end, I'll be more than happy to answer your queries. So let's get going. This session elaborates the deeply embedded linkages between the concept of environmental sustainability and the ISO international standards. Not collectively as well as discretely, we will discuss that how these standards contribute to enhancing environmental sustainability and energy management system within organizations, while fostering resilience, driving continual improvement, and simultaneously attaining United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But we need to understand the facts first. We need to understand why so much of effort is being put into this United Nations SDGs. What are the ground realities? We need to know the facts first. So let's begin with the facts. By the year 2030, we may need 2 Earths to regenerate natural resources that we use today. Reason? Well, the increase in extraction of natural resources in the last 50 years has tripled. The rate at which we consume the natural resources is almost twice than the rate of regeneration of these natural resources. As a result of this, about 24.7 million acres of forest land has been lost, which is roughly equal to 14 million soccer fields. Now, as a result of that, we have lost something like 75 billion tons of fertile soil, which could have been used for cultivation. It's not just a matter of losing the fertile soil. We have also lost the natural habitat, loss in diversity. Let's not forget the source of the raw materials for the pharmaceutical products that we use comes from this forest land. But this is not all. In addition to this, we have also lost something like 415 billion tons of glaciers. And losing glaciers means that rise in sea level, it causes sea level rise, and it gives way to flooding. So it becomes absolutely necessary to exercise sustainability management. But what exactly is sustainability management? All about equitable industrial or commercial development for planet, people, and profits, known as the triple bottom line. Look at it. First P stands for planet, not for people. Very clear. If we have the planet, then we as people live, right? So what we have to do is we have to strike a balance between environment protection, social equity, and the organization's ability to exercise governance. The whole concept is known as ESG. However, United Nations has put forth the definition of sustainable development as something that meets our current needs without compromising the ability of next generations to meet their future needs. So let's go straight and see the correlation between the standards, all three environmental related standards, ISO 14001, ISO 14064, and ISO 50001, vis-a-vis the United Nations Sustainable Goals. There are 17 altogether. So if your organization were to go for ISO 14001 certification alone, that helps in addressing at least 7 of the SDGs, namely responsible consumption and production, sustainable cities and communities, affordable and clean energy, clean water and sanitation, life below water, climate action, life on land. I've marked all these 7 SDGs. By the way, when I say that certification to ISO 14001 helps you to meet these 7 SDGs, you're not just meeting these 7 SDGs. Let's not forget, all these SDGs are interconnected with each other. So if you are training your staff on the subject of environment, if you're influencing your customers, if you are providing guidelines to your suppliers for compliance to environment, then in such a way, by adopting such an approach, you're also meeting the SDG of quality education. Hence, certification to ISO 14001 alone helps you address all environment-related SDGs of United Nations, as well as it also addresses some other social and governance-related SDGs. So what are we talking about? We're talking about environmental indicators. We're talking about carbon emissions. We're talking about responsible consumption and production. And also we are talking about health, safety, and well-being. Going back to the definition of the word environment, where it says environmental aspect is that activity of your organization that can have an impact on the surroundings, and the surroundings comprise of air, water, land, flora, fauna, and humans. So as long as your organization's activity has an impact on any one of these elements, then it's about time that you have to put in place a control system. Okay, and this is what these certifications call for. However, as a practitioner of the ISO standards, you and I, we all know that when it comes to adopting an objective, establishing an objective and adopting a management plan, we need to prioritize. We need to prioritize what needs to be done first and what needs to be done later. The worst impact that we get is from air pollution, particularly the emissions. These emissions are known as the anthropogenic, caused by man. Or in other words, you may also refer to it as the industrial pollution. And it leads to climate change. And what exactly is the result of climate change? Climate change is a precursor for all the disasters you can think of: droughts, hurricanes, floods, sea level rise. And let's not forget, whenever there is a flooding, whenever there is a sea level rise, people get displaced. And that leads to homelessness and poverty. So what are we talking about? We are talking about the fact that environmental issues are deeply connected with social issues. But that's not the end in itself. Your business gets disrupted. It gets disrupted to a very large extent. I would like to add something over here. All those organizations that are certified to ISO 9001 quality management system, even those organizations will now have to demonstrate that what kind of risk their organization faces when it comes to the impact of climate change. So now we know it. It could be disrupted supply chains, not just due to weather conditions, but probably some of your suppliers might be stationed at places that have been affected by floods. So will you get your supplies in time? Perhaps no. Will you be able to manufacture a product and give it to your customers? No. So your business gets affected. The quality of your service gets affected. And what is the precursor to that? Climate change. That's the reason we need to put in place a timely action. And there are several more reasons to it. As we proceed, we'll discuss more. The efforts to protect the environment have been put in place for almost for the last 70 years. Efforts have been put in place by United Nations and its derivative bodies. The most important one is the 2015 Paris Agreement, where a consensus was reached that all nations put together shall strive to limit the increase of global warming. It has to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels, which means emissions have to be reduced 45% by year 2030, comparing it to the 2015 baseline. And again, comparing it to that baseline, that towards 2050, the aim is to reach net zero emission. Right. So I'll stop here for a while, and it's time for a short poll. Please participate. Thanks. Thank you. The reason we are conducting this webinar today is being conducted soon after the COP28 conference in Dubai, the place from where I'm speaking to you. Luckily, I happened to attend this COP28 summit here in Dubai between 30th of November and 12th of December 2023, where all these bodies came together. Around 167 nations came together, and there was a commitment. For the very first time, there was a commitment, a serious commitment to cut down on the fuel consumption. So, however, there are certain challenges. It's not that simple. First and foremost contributor to global warming is fossil fuel. This was the first time the country itself, being a producer of fossil fuel, signed and agreed that it will put in efforts and ensure that concrete steps are undertaken to limit the global warming. However, there are challenges. The challenges ahead. For example, there are certain financial and technological constraints for some vulnerable countries. We have to overcome these challenges. And for that matter, United Nations, along with environment protection agencies worldwide, during the summit have put a pressure not only on the nations, but also on the leading corporates to put in efforts, mitigation efforts, in order to reach the goal. Right. So how do we go and demonstrate our commitment? We are here to help you out. It all begins with compliance to the standard ISO 14064 or greenhouse gas accounting. Right, so it has got three parts, part one, part two, part three. Part one is very simple and straightforward. Companies that have not taken into consideration any GHG accounting so far, anyone new to the subject can straight away head for part one, which is about establishing the inventory, the GHG, greenhouse gas inventory. Outcome of that is a simple GHG statement, which we at LRQA, our verifiers, would come and conduct a verification. Similarly, if your organization is already familiar with what GHG accounting is, and if you have already established the inventory and you're moving forward to reduce your emissions, and you have put in efforts to remove the emissions, rather capture the emissions, then you would demonstrate compliance with part two of the standard, which mainly talks about projects that you have undertaken. So what we want to see as a result of your GHG statement is efforts undertaken and the impact on reducing the GHG. The statement that you produce again would be vetted by our verifiers from LRQA, and same would be the approach if your system is quite advanced and you are considering the CFP approach, carbon footprint approach, meaning to produce 1 unit of product, how many GHG emissions were released in the air. If you have that kind of accounting history, then we expect from you a GHG statement in line with ISO 14067. The end result of all three parts, whether you subscribe to part one, part two, or whether you subscribe to ISO 14067, the result is same, a GHG statement. But when it comes to us, LRQA verifiers, our approach is to assess your statement vis-a-vis part three of the standard. So part one and part two is there to demonstrate compliance, whereas part three is only a guideline for us verifiers, which tells us how to conduct the verification. This is the approach. Now, let's go a little more further and we'll explain to you the benefits of it and the approach. First of all, what you have to do. Most difficult part is deciding the organizational boundary. Now, let's consider that and sort out that problem. If you are a multinational, you might be thinking how many facilities to consider. You have got facilities spread all across the globe. So it becomes difficult how to draw the boundary for GHG, greenhouse gas accounting. It's very simple. You have options available. If there is only one facility about which you are concerned, where the emissions are large, and you want to attend to it immediately, well, just draw a boundary around that single facility. We would say it would be considered as the national boundary for your facility. And whatever emissions are released within that boundary, only that would be considered for verification. But however, as a multinational, if you're considering more than one facility, then again, just let us know in which countries you operate, and in each country, how many facilities you want to consider for verification. Our approach would be to conduct the verification in 2 stages. What we do in these 2 stages is stage 1, we look at your data, your GHG accounting data. Based on the data, we identify the sources of the emission and we develop a verification plan, detailed verification plan. And then during stage 2, we look into the fact that how true is your statement? Is it a factual reflection of the emissions that you are emitting, the emissions that go out into the air? So what we do is our verifiers will go a little more in detail and see the sources of emission, how it is being monitored, what meters gauges are being used, whether the emissions are consistent over the months or not, and then is the true information captured in your GHG statement. This is a detailed verification which we undertake during stage 2. Similarly, if you are going for verification vis-a-vis ISO 14064, at the same time, you can consider heading for ISO 50001 environment management system as well. Reason being, the lesser is your energy consumption, the lesser will be your emissions. So if you are undertaking steps to cut down on your carbon emissions, how do you do that? Is by regulating, controlling, and reducing your energy consumption. So here comes the benefit. What LRQA could do for you is not only provide you services, verification services for the emissions that you have cut down, but at the same time, the energy that you have reduced, the energy consumption that you have reduced, we could also verify that and provide you ISO 50001 certification. And it's very simple. Let me quickly take you through the steps. All you have to do is establish a baseline year and see what was the consumption in that baseline year. And for the future years, what plans are you putting in place to reduce your energy consumption? And then after completion of that timeline, you sit down and you assess your energy, you vet your energy performance indicators. And that is when we step in, verify your successes, and upon successful assessment, provide you certification. It's probably the simplest certification that I've seen. I'm a practitioner for almost 7 or 8 standards, and I can assure you that certification to ISO 50001 is probably the simplest certification, both when it comes to establishing the system as well as when it comes to verifying. So what are the benefits that you would reap as a result of these verifications and certifications? First and foremost, these certifications will help you in your P&L, profit and loss decision making, identifying emission reduction opportunities and thereby increase profitability through reduction in energy consumption. You will have a better control on your risk and opportunity management. You'll be in a better position to address all climate-related risks, including the financial, regulatory, supply chain, litigation, and reputational risks that are attached to climate change. It will also give you an opportunity to participate in voluntary programs, like, for instance, you will be able to participate in ETU, emissions trading. Then there are the CEU units, certifiable energy units, that you can buy. And above all is the credibility in your organization, right? We have already discussed that through the certifications and verifications, you can easily address 7, as a minimum, 7 of the SDGs out of total United Nations 17 sustainable. What else? You will be able to reduce the carbon footprint and thereby fulfill your social obligation. Remember, your consumer is well aware about the subject of environment. So not only you're fulfilling your social commitment, you're also retaining your consumer, your customer. So we stop here for a short poll once again. Kindly participate, and I'll rejoin you in a while.
Thank you, Amir. Over to you again.
Thanks. So before I invite questions from you, just want to highlight how LRQA can help you in obtaining the certifications and also fulfilling your social obligations. And remember, COP28 has just finished in Dubai. The governments are becoming more and more strict when it comes to monitoring emissions from the industries. Listed companies, companies that are listed in the stock exchange, for them it has become mandatory to produce the GHG statement on an annual basis. And hence, it's about time that one must get ready for such certifications before we are told by the government and before the government imposes strict legislations and before it imposes any penalties, fines on the industries. It's about time to proactively obtain these certifications as well as head for GHG verifications, as a result of which we give you the assurance statement. An assurance statement from a third party says a lot, because GHG statement is something that you prepare yourself. Now, is this truthful? How would the market get to know about it? That is where the role of LRQA as a third-party verifier comes in. The GHG statement that you prepare, we vet it, and we vet it in depth. And as a result of that, we release an assurance statement. That assurance statement is a public document which you can share with your consumers and then thereby gain confidence from them in your business. So if you want further details, feel free to visit our website. Not only that, we provide training services right from the very elementary beginning stages to the full scope of the subject. And Feel free to approach us anytime for gap analysis and certification services. So,
Thank you so much, Amir. Yes, I at least learned a lot from the session, so I thought it was absolutely enlightening and very interesting. Thank you so much. We can now move on to the question answers. So we have a lot of questions coming in, and I encourage, if there are more questions with audiences, please keep sending on chat. We do have a good 20-30 minutes left with us, so we can definitely take questions. So whatever you have in mind, please keep on sending to us on chat. Okay, so our first question, Amir, is that we are an organization certified for IMS, QMS, EMS, OSHAs. How do we incorporate climate change amendment in our certified systems?
Oh, okay, fine. It's a very good question, and glad to know that your organization is already certified to all these 3 standards, because you do not have to do much. All you have to do is put in very minimal effort. Going back to your ISO 14001 certification, I'm sure you would have identified all the environmental aspects. Thereby, you would have identified all those environmental aspects of your organization that lead to emissions, carbon emissions. So you already have the stock for your GHG inventory. All you have to do is, if you're measuring, I'm sure you're measuring the emissions, keep a record of that, okay? And in addition to that, if you have undertaken projects that help you in removal of the emissions, then in your GHG statement, do mention what are those projects, okay? So if that is the case, then I suggest you go for part two of ISO 14064. If you're just trying to build up the inventory, then I would recommend part 1 of ISO 14064. Again, answering to your question, I'm summing it up for you. All you have to do is go back to your ISO 14001 records, look what are the sources of emission. You have already identified it for ISO 14001 certification. Pull up the records, check through the meters, what has been the readings, and then compile it. It's as simple as that. Your company is already certified, so you have to put in a very minimal effort, I would say.
Great. I hope that answered your question, Ms. Patil. Thank you so much, Amir. We move on to our next question. It says, it's a very interesting question, rather. I'm not sure whether we can answer it perfectly, but yeah, I'll just put it out there. That regarding ISO 50001 and ISO 14064 standards, why is it that generally there is no push or minimum push from external stakeholders to pursue these certifications?
Okay, if you're waiting for it, it's gonna come soon. Okay, I just mentioned about COP28, Conference of the Parties. Let me tell you what exactly is COP, Conference of the Parties. It is a derivative body of United Nations, and it is tasked with monitoring the reduction in emissions worldwide. So it were them who were here in Dubai for the meeting, for the summit. And I will tell you the figures that they have. I have just jotted down those figures. They were very blunt. And they said there is a 66% chance that the global warming would exceed the goal of 1.5 degree centigrade, which means you have to keep the global warming within the 1.5 degree centigrade target. It has to be less than that. But the scientists have predicted, the scientists of COP28, they have predicted that there's a 66% chance that it might exceed. And henceforth, they have put a lot of pressure on 167 nations that were attending COP28. Luckily, I happened to attend it. I live here. So there was a lot of pressure, not only from the environment protection agencies and the environment protection pressure groups, but there was a very firm push from United Nations itself. And do you know what was the result? UAE, the host itself, which is a producer of fossil fuel, it took the initiative and said, you know what, we are switching over to other renewable sources of energy. Okay, we will be into energy business, but we will switch over to renewable sources of energy. And we expect the remaining 166 signatories, the other nations, to follow the same. And the word has gone out very strongly. One, two, governments. It has already been rolled out in Europe. It's coming to Asia right now. If I refer to Europe, the law is very clear. The EU law is very clear. If there is an organization with more than 60 employees, it will have to produce the GHG statement, and it has to be publicly floated. Now, this is what happened in Europe. Now, with the pressure, United Nations pressure coming forth, you can expect the same to happen in Asia and soon in Africa as well. So if you're waiting for it, don't worry, that pressure is going to come soon. Hope I've answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amir. Naveed, I hope your question is answered. Please let us know if you have any follow-up questions. Okay, moving on to the next question. Is ISO 14064 applicable to those companies that have direct emissions contributing to GHG?
All right, quite a good question. If you refer to ISO 14064, it very clearly says that you have the option. Direct emissions. When it comes to direct emissions, yes, you have to measure it. Let me just quickly tell you, without taking much time, quickly tell you what are the different classifications when it comes to emissions. There are three classifications referred as scope. So there is a scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is what you're talking about, direct emissions. To give you an example, you buy the fuel, you run your equipment on the purchased fuel. The emissions that go out directly into the atmosphere from your own factory, those are scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are those which basically are related to the purchased energy, purchased electricity. Okay, so if you're buying electricity from such a provider that burns the furnace oil or the fuel to generate electricity, then scope 2 emissions, if you sit down to measure scope 2 emissions, that has to be taken into consideration. Now, in many countries, you don't have the option for scope 2, but in countries where you have the option of the scope 2, meaning you have two service providers, one is selling electricity to you that comes from furnace oil, and there's another provider of electricity and they generate it through solar park. They have got solar panels installed, and or they've got windmills installed, and that is where they get the electricity and provide it to you. So you have options here. In such a country, obviously the stakeholders would expect you to buy the energy from a source where scope 2 emissions are less, which means the service provider who generates electricity for you from renewable sources, solar energy, windmill. So coming back to your questions, having explained it, sorry, I need to also define for you scope 3 emissions. The scope 3 emissions refers to emissions which are emitted by your suppliers, service providers. Now, coming back to your questions, if you are involved if it is the first time, if it is the first time ever you're sitting down to structure your inventory for greenhouse gases, certainly you would start with scope 1, which is your direct emissions, which is fairly simple. Keep an account of how much of fuel you have purchased or refrigerants that you have purchased uh, and that you're using at your own facility. Emissions from those would be considered as scope 1 emissions or direct emissions. That is how most organizations begin with. But as your system matures, then you can include scope 2, which is keeping an account of the emissions which go into the air uh, as a result of the electricity that you have purchased. Okay. And the third step and the last step is taking into account emissions that have been emitted by your other suppliers. So to begin with, if it is your first time, I would say just go for scope 1. And then once you have experienced how to keep an account of scope 1, then you can easily proceed to scope 2 and scope 3. Hope I've answered your question. Just a little more word. It's fairly simple. The formula is very simple for GHG accounting. If you know the quantities, of the fuel, it is known as activity data. All you have to do is quantity of the fuel multiplied by some international figures for emissions. You refer to the international, there are certain international tables, like to give you an example, IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change. Then there is, and then Europe has its own panel. They publish the figures. If you're using a certain type of fuel, they would let you know what is the emission factor. So you just have to pick up the emission factor from there, multiply it by the quantity of fuel that you have consumed, and there you go. You would get to know the actual GHG emissions that you have sent out in the air. It's fairly simple. Start with the scope 1. When you have gained the confidence, add scope 2, and then proceed for scope 3. Hope my answer is clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next question. This should be a quick one. So we are already certified to ISO 14001 and ISO 50001. For the next step, we would like to get certified to ISO 14064. I would like to ask, what are the steps to implement ISO 14064 in such a certified organization?
Okay, good question. Part of it I've already answered, but a few more things I would add here when it comes to answering this particular question. If your company is already certified to ISO 14001 and ISO 50001, it's like more than half the job done. To be honest, it's like almost 90% of your job is done. If you're talking about ISO 14064, well, it is not a certification. It doesn't lead to certification. It leads to verification. Okay, the difference. ISO 14064 is a guideline. ISO 50001 is a standard set of requirements. ISO 14001 is a standard set of requirements, whereas ISO 14064 is a guideline. How to construct an inventory of your greenhouse gas emissions. So as per this guideline, what you do is your company is already certified to 14001, which means you already know what are the sources of emissions. Okay. You said your company is already certified to ISO 50001, which means you are actually measuring your energy consumption. So you know your energy consumption data, which is also known as activity data. While answering to my previous question, I had highlighted that point. You already know how much of the fuel is being consumed, how much of the electricity is being consumed at your facility. So you already have the data. So all you have to do is, next step, refer to the international publications, IPCC, DEFRA, depending on where your facility is. If it is in Europe, then it has to be DEFRA. If it is elsewhere, then refer to IPCC. All you have to do is, if you have used diesel oil, then check out what is the emission factor for diesel oil. Pick up the emission factor for diesel oil from IPCC publication. You already have the activity data for the fuel that you have consumed. Just multiply that activity data, the consumption level of the fuel, with the emission factor. That's about it. You have now built up your greenhouse gas inventory. It's that simple. Hope I've answered the question. To begin with, that is it.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you. Okay, for scope 3 selection, is there any recommended tool?
Okay, fine. Scope 3. Recommended tool, yes, not one, several, but they all say the same thing. I would say you should proceed for scope 3 when you're confident. When you're confident that you have built up your inventory of scope 1. You already have a good established inventory of scope 1. And not only that, it would be excellent if a third-party verifier has vetted your scope 1 inventory and issued an assurance statement. Now that would give you the confidence. If you are past that stage, then I think you're in a good position to proceed for scope 3. Now, how it will work out? The reference point for you should be ISO 14064 Part 1. Refer to the annexure. In particular, refer to Annex B. I repeat, refer to Annex B, B for ball, of ISO 14064 Part 1. It will give you the different categories. There are at least 5 categories that describe the different kind of scope 3 emissions. To name a few, it could be from the party that provides you services, transportation services. It could be a party which provides you accommodation or hospitality services if ever you're traveling abroad. Then it could be your suppliers who provide you the raw material. Don't forget, if a raw material was transported to you, you do need to add the transportation, you do need to add the emissions which were sent out into the atmosphere during transportation. So the guidelines are very clearly there in Annexure B of ISO 14064 Part 1. That is one place. If you want further guidelines to understand how to include scope 3 emissions into your inventory, GHG inventory, I would say do read the GHG protocol. It's there online. The publication is for free. Just open up GHG protocol. There are about 15 categories for scope 3 emissions. So either you refer to the ISO 14064 Part 1 annexure, or you refer to GHG protocol. GHG protocol provides something like 15 categories. However, having said that, when it comes to verification and when it comes to obtaining the statement from us, assurance statement from us, remember, it would be against ISO 14064 Part 1. So you can read GHG protocol, the 15 categories for scope 3, you can read that, gain an idea. But when it comes to verification, we will check the compliance against ISO 14064 Part 1. Hope I've answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amit. Okay, the next question maybe I can answer and then we can move on to the next question. It says, is there any ISO 14064 and ISO 50001 training available for auditors? So yes, we do have training courses planned throughout the year. I've already put the inquiries email ID here on chat for everybody. Please do reach out to us so that our team can assist you specifically for the course you want in the geography you want, because there are dates in multiple geographies, multiple cities and countries. So please do reach out to us on this email and our training team will get back to you. Thank you so much. Okay, next is, does LRQA support GHG inventory verification services?
Verification, that's our core business. That's what we are here for. It's a two-stage process. It's a two-stage process. The first and foremost thing is that you need to have the GHG inventory. If you have established the GHG inventory, either for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, or for all three scopes, if the GHG inventory is already established, invite us. We would come for a two-stage visit. Stage 1, we check your data. We check out the sources of emission. We see your approach. Is your approach aligned to ISO 14064 part 1? So we check the alignment of your system vis-a-vis the guideline. We look into the fact whether you have correctly and completely identified all sources of emission. 2. 3, the data. Have you captured the data, emission data from the sources? So whatever emissions have gone out into the atmosphere from the sources that you have, are these being captured on a regular basis? These are the three elements that we check in stage 1. Then based on that, we provide a verification, detailed verification plan to you for stage 2. And it is during stage 2 that we go into details and see what quantification methods you have established, meaning from where you have obtained the emission factors, which international publications you're referring to, are your calculations correct? The consumption levels that you're showing on paper, do they actually match with the quantities that were consumed on the factory floor, facility floor? That is what we check during the stage 2 verification. Outcome of verification 2 is an assurance statement. An assurance statement that your GHG inventory and the books that you are maintaining for your GHG inventory, it has been vetted, and a third party is giving an assurance that it was thoroughly verified. And this assurance statement is a public document which you can share, or which you can publicly publish as well. Hope I've answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, going on to the next question. What is the basis of measuring carbon footprint from your side when you are conducting an audit? So how does the auditor measure the carbon footprint?
How do we don't measure the we as verifier, we do not measure the carbon footprint. We just verify how correctly you have measured. Okay, there's no just one method. Let me be very clear about it. There is no just one method. There are several quantification methods. So what we do as verifier is we come, and during verification, especially during stage 1, we ask you which quantification method you have adopted. Okay. Now, what we do in stage 2 is we verify how correctly you are aligned to your own adopted quantification method. Okay. So we don't measure carbon footprint. We only verify whether your approach is correct or not. So, and there is no single method when it comes to quantifying the carbon footprint. There's several methods. It's your own call. You have to decide which quantification method works best for you. Once you have selected and determined the method for quantification, tell us about it during stage 1. We make a note of it, and during stage 2, we check how correctly you have, you have aligned yourself and your calculations with your own selected methodology. Okay, so we as verifiers, we as verifiers, we don't measure. We just check how you are measuring. Hope I've answered the question.
Thank you so much. Okay, we don't have much time, so we'll just be able to take last 3 questions. Here goes the first one. Just want to summarize, if our company would like to go for ISO 14001 certification, then is it better if we follow the rules for emission in 14064? Do you want me to repeat the question, Amir?
No, I think I've understood the question. A company which has not obtained any certification, they want to go for ISO 14001 certification, but at the same time, they want to follow the guidelines of ISO 14064.
Correct.
Right? My answer to this is, wow, you are just on the right track. I mean, it's probably too late. You obtain ISO 14001 certification, and then when you hear in the market that it's about time to get a verifier's statement for vis-a-vis ISO 14064, and all this happens because there's a push from the government, there's a push from the environment protection agencies. So you realize this fact much later. Instead of being late from the onset itself, you say that, okay, I'm going for 14001 certification, not just the 14001 certification, but I also want to ensure the emissions from my sources. When I say sources, I'm talking about all those chimneys, exhausts from where the emissions go out. I need to, while obtaining ISO 14001 certification, I've already identified these sources. Not only that, I will also start building up the inventory, whether ISO 14000 auditors ask that from me or not. Irrespective of that, let me start building up the inventory for GHE in line with ISO 14064. You're starting off with this approach, wherein you are considering both the guideline and the standard. I think when you are inviting auditors for 14001 certification, make sure that you also invite our verifier at the same time to provide you a consolidated service, certification plus verification. Probably this is one of the best, rather ideal approach one can think of. If you have such a plan on your cards, go for it. Yeah, good luck.
Awesome. Thank you, Amit. Okay, we have the next question, which probably I can answer, and then move on to the last 2 questions. It says, do you conduct energy audits? So yes, LRQA does conduct a lot of energy audits across the region, across the globe. We also have a customized product called as energy efficiency audits, where we start with the lowest hanging fruits, and for zero investment, you can see almost at least 20 to 30% of your energy savings coming in the first year itself with zero investment. So yes, LRQA conducts energy audits against 50001, the standard, also against the company's own customized requirements. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay. We are certified ISO 9001 organization. How much % of requirements of ISO 14001 and ISO 14064 are already covered if I am ISO 9001 certified?
Okay, let me just repeat the question. If I've understood it well, the company is already certified to ISO 9001, and they just want to know that to what extent, by virtue of 9001 certification, to what extent ISO 14001 requirements have been addressed, and how much of ISO 14064 guidelines have been addressed. Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I would say, well, it would be unfair to give a quantified figure. It would be really unfair to give a quantified figure. But I can tell you that a lot of basic homework, groundwork has been done. Because the first and foremost thing when it comes to ISO 9001 is establishing the organizational context. What is your organization? To whom it is catering? Who are the stakeholders? It's a requirement of 14,001. So that has already been done. Okay. So if you are heading for ISO 14,001 certification, that groundwork, ISO 9001 has already done that groundwork for you. The subjects are, by the way, different. So all you have to do is approach the same set of stakeholders, ask them what are their concerns when it comes to your organization, what are their concerns, environmental related concerns. One, then you will be able to identify the potential risk and opportunities related to environment. Who is asking you to reduce the fuel consumption? Is someone suggesting? Is any customer suggesting, or there is a pressure group insisting on you to go for renewable energy? Now that is an opportunity. Then the government or the local community might be concerned that you are consuming too much of electricity and the neighborhood doesn't get it. So you should be, the pricing for you should be different. Now you want to avoid such pricing. So what you do is you immediately say, no, don't tax me further. I'm going for renewable energy. So that's an opportunity. Identify that. But it's only possible when you know your stakeholders. And if you say that you have obtained ISO 9001 certification, it means you already know your stakeholders, you already know their concerns. It's just that going back to them and asking them, please do highlight the environment related concerns. Once they highlight it, address them, and then you're ready to go for 14,001 certification. And in due course, when you are establishing the system for 14,001, you would identify the sources of emissions. What are the exhaust points? Where are the chimneys? Then you would need to install the meters, the gauges for measuring the emissions. That's a requirement for 14,001 as well. So thereby you will get the data of emissions. Okay. And when you have collected the data of emissions for 14,001, the same data holds good for building the GHG inventory, greenhouse gas inventory. So ultimately, you have the GHG inventory, then call us for the verification at the same time when you call us for 14,001 certification. As simple as that. Hope I've answered the question.
Thank you, Amit. Last question for the day. Is GHG verification mandatory in ISO 14,001?
Good question. Okay. It's a very intelligent question. It's a very intelligent question, I would say. And yeah, so let's answer it a bit in detail. I'm glad that someone came up with this question. ISO 14,001 is a standard, okay? And this standard tells you very clearly that you have to be compliant with the law, okay? And you have to be compliant with the law. So if the law of your land tells you to come up with a GHG inventory, publish a statement, if the law of the land tells you, then going back to the ISO 14,001 requirement, it says you have to be compliant with the law. And so you will not get ISO 14,001 certification in such a situation, because the law of the land is telling you to establish the GHG inventory, obtain an assurance statement, so on and henceforth, and you have not done it. But you still have ISO 14,001 certification. All right. When it is time for renewal, when it is time for surveillance audit, if you have not complied with the law, which calls for GHG inventory, then you will end up losing 14,001 certification as well. So does ISO 14001 explicitly tell you to go for GHG inventory? Answer is explicitly no. But when the law of the land dictates you to establish the GHG inventory and get a assurance statement from a third-party verifier, when the law tells you, then going back to the standard, what does it say? It says, be compliant with the local environmental law. Have you done it? Yes, good. No, then you will lose your 14,001 certification as well. It's as simple as that. Quite an intelligent question. I'm glad it came up.
Thank you so much, Amir. And that concludes our webinar for the day. We still have some questions and we'll be happy to answer them on email. So thank you so much for all the questions. There are some people who are requesting to be connected to Amir. Request you to please send the email to inquiries.ael@lrqa.com, and I'm sure we'll be able to connect you to Amir. At the same time, whatever inquiries you have, because I see a lot of inquiries related to training, related to audits, please reach out to us on the given email ID. Our training team, our audit team, they will reach out to you within 2 working days. Thank you so much again for such a lively, inquisitive audience. It has been great answering your questions. Amir, thank you so much for being such a wonderful speaker. Really appreciate you taking out the time. And I hope I will see you all again in our next webinar. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, great evening.
My pleasure. Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you. Thanks for the questions. The questions were really intelligent questions. Thank you.